Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. Tonight I've got 3 encounters that are very exciting. 1 is a Dogman encounter, 2 are unknown cryptid encounters. And these are all from you guys, subscribers. That makes it that much better because it's from you guys, and you guys sent them in to me, and that means the world to me. So, before we get started, a couple of links. My PayPal link and Patreon link, and my merchandise link. Those are 3 links that help keep this channel going and help keep it commercial free. Also, my second channel link is in the description too. That's a channel dedicated just to creepypasta, voice acting, and fan fiction. There's about 3 videos on there. There's going to be more. And with that, let's get on with these encounters, shall we? Our first subscriber encounter of the evening is a Dogman encounter. I'm a 47-year-old female from Idaho Falls, Idaho. I grew up in Idaho, and I'm an avid animal lover, especially wolves, since I was very young. I'm writing to tell you about my Dogman encounter when I was around 16 or 17 years old. It would have been around 1986 to 1987. I graduated from high school in 1989. Before this encounter, I believed in spirits, but thought these things were just a myth. Legends told by adults to scare children into staying inside at night. I loved the night and feared very little that was out there. I've grown up camping, fishing, and going on hiking trips. I don't hunt, but members of my family do. With my family, and I still love to do these things to this day. I don't fear the woods, but I'm extra cautious in them now. I know these things are out there. Anyway, myself, my friend L, female, and my other friend B, male, decided one night to go into our local cemetery and look for what was called the knocking grave and the werewolf grave. We found the knocking grave and discovered that it was just a loose board which vibrates back when you knock on the grave. We never found the werewolf grave, so we just chalked it up to being a myth. We decided to go back to the car and were talking when L and B decided they wanted some alone time. They were a couple back then. I got out of the car and decided to walk around the cemetery by myself. It was a beautiful night with the moon shining above. Ironic, I know. I was walking along at the old gravestones and thinking how sad it is that so many people are completely forgotten after they die, when I heard a strange sound to my left. I was standing near a mausoleum, looking down into another part of the cemetery. I heard the sound again and started walking towards it. It sounded as though something was crunching on something. I stood there for a minute listening. I immediately noticed how quiet it had gotten in the cemetery, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck and my arms. Usually, there is a noise from cars or dogs barking or crickets or something like that, but there was nothing. I then saw a silhouette of something big and black standing a little ways away from me, around 20 feet away to be exact. Something told me to back away slowly and leave now, but I ignored it. I crept closer to the creature, never taking my eyes off it. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could see very well, especially with the moonlight helping light up the night. What I saw terrified and also piqued my curiosity. The creature first looked like a huge wolf, but its front legs and torso were abnormally large, and the back legs were huge as well. It had a long, furry tail behind it, just like a wolf's tail. The head was huge, and it had long, pointed ears with stuffs of fur at the tip. From what I could see, it was leaning down and it was eating something. The sounds I had heard was the crunching it made when it bit into whatever it was eating. I was excited because I had always wanted to see a wild wolf, and I thought that's what I was looking at. I figured that maybe a wolf had escaped the zoo, which was right next door to the cemetery, and had caught a rabbit or something. I realized, though, that the zoo didn't have wolves in it, and hadn't had one for years. That made me even more excited and curious. I stared at the creature for about a minute or so and then shifted my legs to get more comfortable. And I must have stepped on a twig or scuffled my feet because the creature suddenly stopped eating, looked up and turned its head my way. It then stood up on its back legs and I heard a loud pop, and that's when I realized that this was not a huge wolf. It was black and had a few brownish streaks in its fur. When it stood up, I saw its head, chest, stomach, and lower body. The shoulders and chest were massive, covered in fur and tapered down as you looked at its stomach area and legs. It reminded me of a bodybuilder on steroids because of how muscular it was. As it stood there, it started to sniff the air and stopped and stared my way. The eyes were a deep orange gold that seemed to glow in the moonlight. It looked at me, and I felt a fear grow deep within me that I had never felt before. I knew it saw me, and I knew that I had made a huge mistake by not leaving when I first got the bad feeling. It felt as though everything went cold and this creature could see within my soul. It stared at me for a minute, and then it opened its mouth and bared its teeth at me as if it were smiling. The teeth were huge and yellowish white, and they looked very sharp, just right for ripping its prey apart. It never took its eyes off me. It then lifted its arm and took a bite out of whatever it was eating. I then realized the sound that I had heard was the crunching bone and tearing flesh as it ate its meal. The hands were like elongated paws, and at the end of each finger were huge black claws that gripped the leg of what it was eating. I stood there watching it eat for what seemed like hours when it could have only been a few minutes. It never took its eyes off of me. The fear I felt overwhelmed me. I felt sick and I was visibly shaking, and so I did the one thing that I had been taught to never do when confronted by a predator. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the car. I didn't care. I couldn't get his eyes out of my head, and that smile, those teeth. I could imagine it catching me and ripping me to shreds as I ran. I made it for the car, though, flung open the door and jumped in screaming for B to start the car and get us out of there. They asked me what was wrong, and I just yelled at them to go now. B looked at me and saw I was terrified and saw the terrified look on my face, so he started the car. And we left, and I had never went back to that cemetery again. Later that night, I told B and L what I had seen, and they both laughed at me and told me it was just my mind playing tricks on me, which made me feel hurt that they didn't believe me, but I could hardly believe it myself. I saw a werewolf, or what is referred to as a Dogman, and I will never forget it. I tried to find more out about these creatures, but all I could really find was more myth and folklore. I never told anyone else about it until recently when I told my 21-year-old daughter what I had seen. She believed me because she has seen things herself, and she knows I wouldn't lie to her, especially about something like this. She could see the terror in my face and hear it in my voice as I relayed the story to her as well. Since my encounter, I have had trouble sleeping at night and cannot sleep in the dark. I have to have a nightlight on. I will still have nightmares about it every once in a while. I know this creature could likely have killed me with one swipe of its massive paw, but that night I was glad it had something else preoccupying its time. In my opinion, these creatures are ancient and have learned to adapt quite well to the change it faces with the population of man and the encroachment into its territory. I don't think they fear us because they know they have a huge advantage over us with their strength, speed, intelligence, and cunning, not to mention their arsenal of weapons. As crazy as it sounds, I am curious about these creatures and would love to learn more about them. These creatures are real and they are out there. Please be safe and aware, everyone. Thank you for listening to my story. Our second cryptid subscriber encounter story comes to us from New Jersey. Hey Jeff, this tale begins not with me personally, but kinda includes the whole family. In 1989, my sister lived a few miles from my parents' house near Woodbury, New Jersey, in a development called Beckett, near Swedesboro, New Jersey. On her way home one night, she saw what she thought was a black wheel coming towards her speeding car from her left side. When the thing got close enough to be identified, she said it looked like a baboon with white line on its side and a long snout. It hit the car, waking up my sleeping niece in the back seat. There was no damage to the vehicle, but she was pretty shaken up when she got home. Then, sometime after that, my niece, who was in the car for the first encounter, was going home with her boyfriend when they passed this thing lying in the road eating a road-killed rabbit. As their car passed the creature, it rose up and ran alongside of their vehicle on its hind legs, keeping pace with it briefly before running off into a farmer's field. Later, when she was watching a cryptid show on Destination America, she showed a video of a hellhound. She excitedly said, pointing at the TV, "That is what we saw." But the thing on TV wasn't running only on its hind legs. Now, just before the outbreak of Desert Storm, I was coming home from their house again from Beckett address in my new car, having taken it to show my sister. I was traveling north on Route 295. I was approaching an overpass of Oak Grove Road. I think it's in Arapahoe, New Jersey, when I noticed this black shadow in the corner of the overpass. As I got closer, the shadow moved to my right, to the left. As an artist, I know light doesn't work like that. The closer you get to an object, the shadow moves away from the light source, not towards it. This thing was black, and I mean black. It gave off no sheen on its fur, which most of all hair will give off. It had thick fur on its shoulders and neck, which bristled as it moved. The closest thing I could liken it to at the time was a mandrill baboon, but totally black. Due to the local legend of the Jersey Devil, I kinda thought it might have been that, but soon dismissed that idea with nothing else to classify it, until I heard about the Dogman. Comparing my info with the reports of the Dogman, it seems pretty close, a lot closer than the Jersey Devil. Anyway, as I passed beneath this thing, under the highway overpass, I noticed its arm gripping the pipe it was crossing on. Again, black as black can be, with no highlights whatsoever on its fur. The fingers were thin and bony, probably a good size also, since it covered a good portion of the pipe. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, sending chills down my spine. I got home and became obsessed with this creature. I told everybody about my encounter. My cousin, also interested in weird stuff, went looking for it with his girlfriend and two of her friends. Well, The worst thing about looking for cryptids is finding them. They found it. The girlfriend, who was all fired up about looking for this thing, suddenly burst into hysterics, screaming, "Don't stop! Don't stop!" Well, cuz drove past this thing while it lie in someone's driveway eating another roadkill bunny, missing their chance to really examine this thing from the safety of their car. The girlfriend calmed down and they went back. In surprise, it was gone. Still don't know what it was. All accounts of these creatures match in the description, so it's some kind of critter running around South Jersey. Since my sister's family moved away from Beckett, I haven't heard anything more about the creature, nor have I gone looking for it. Like I said, the worst thing about looking for cryptids is finding them. Our third and final subscriber cryptid encounter story comes to us from Washington, from a friend of mine who I'm gonna remain anonymous for because I didn't ask him if he'd like me to mention his name. Anyway, it's definitely a scary story, so I hope you guys enjoy it. So about 15 years ago, I was maybe 12 or 13. My aunt and uncle, as well as some family friends, had planned a camping trip. We all drove together in a pretty decent-sized RV. This is Washington State along Old Snohomish Road. It's a pretty wooded area. We get to the property of, I guess, my aunt's relatives, and by the time we arrived, it was already dusk, so we drive out far past their house into this large field that has woods on one side and a river on the other. To get to the river, there's a 10-foot wide, 30-foot long slope. On either side was very thick brush on a practically vertical drop-off. Before it got dark, we all made a fire down on the bank of the river. After an hour or so relaxing by the fire and roasting hot dogs, everyone besides myself had retreated back to the RV for some beers. I decided to stay by the fire and listen to the sounds of the river. At this point, it's practically pitch black, overcast, blocked out most of the light from the moon. The only light was that of the fire, which, as you know, blinds you more than it illuminates your surroundings. Next to the bottom of the slope that leads back up to the field was a lean-to shelter made out of metal poles and tarp that held the firewood. Suddenly, the lean-to started rustling and stopped. I stared at it, trying to identify the source of the noise. After a few seconds, it started rustling again, but now I was starting to get freaked out. I called my uncle's name and then my family friends. Instead of a response, the tarps just continued to shake. Now I was really freaked out. I picked up a rock and chucked it at the shelter. In response, it shook more violently. Now I was starting to doubt that it was just my uncle messing with me and started throwing more rocks because I wanted him to come out and stop scaring me. Something from behind or in the back of the shelter let out this growl. I don't really know how to describe it, nasally or guttural. It sounded like a noise you would make as a joke until I heard it again. The tones and pitch were inhuman. After hearing it a second time, my blood ran cold. I was frozen. I just stood there with a rock in my hand, unsure of what to do. I think one of the rocks I threw may have hit whatever the hell it was because it sounded furious and didn't stop its yelling or however you would describe the sounds it was making. Then the bushes and small trees from the bottom of the embankment started rustling, and it scaled a damn near 20-foot wall of thick vegetation and pricker bushes all the way up to the top in only a few seconds. I could make out the movement of the brush the whole way it went, but I couldn't see an actual outline. After the thing got to the top, it continued to roar or yell and started throwing handfuls of dirt and grass into the air. A few seconds of this, and then everything went silent. I stood in the same position, frozen, rock poised to throw, and heart beating out of my chest. Remaining by the fire for a few more minutes, I waited and listened for any noises. After not hearing anything else, I ran back to the RV as fast as I could. Pulling that door open, I practically dove into the safety of the vehicle. Everyone was sitting around drinking beers, playing card games. They all turned their heads and looked at me, my eyes wide and my breathing heavy. I tried to explain what happened. I guess they thought I was messing around because nobody took me seriously. Later in the night, after my uncle and one of his buddies had a pretty good buzz on, they thought it would be fun to go check out the area and see if they could hear any weird stuff. Wanting to prove myself and also not wanting to be left behind, I figured I'd be safe with them and went along. As we went out into the field, a distant kind of howl rang out from pretty far away. It didn't necessarily sound like a wolf, but deeper in pitch. Pretty freaky, but rather far away. Then, as we were walking around, there was a crashing, like heavy footsteps in the woods about 200 feet away from the RV. They started walking towards the noise quietly. Reluctantly, I followed. About 30 feet from the crashing, we stopped. We all just crouched and listened. They started whispering to each other, speculating on what it was. Their idea of whispering was the drunken, almost yelling kind you hear people doing at the movies. All of a sudden, this huge crash in the tree line ahead of us echoed throughout the silent night. I don't know what it was, but it sounded like someone had felled a tree. They took off running, and believe me, I did also. Once we made it back to the RV, my uncle locked the door and suggested nobody go back outside for the night. That was advice we all followed. I'm still not sure of what it was out there that night, but my aunt later told us that when she was a kid in that same area, she was walking home from school one day and happened to look up on the hill and saw a towering figure spreading two decent-sized trees apart and peering out through the middle before releasing them and disappearing back into the woods. Did I not tell you that these were 3 amazingly horrifying subscriber cryptid encounters? First, a dogman in a cemetery. It doesn't get any scarier than that. Then, weird New Jersey. You know, you've got the Jersey Devil, you've got all sorts of crazy stuff there. Now you've got... It really sounds like a dogman to me. And then, 12 or 13 years old, hanging out by a river by yourself, fire, and all of a sudden some crazy noises. And then you're with your uncle and his friends, and they run, drunk. You know, there's something scary out there. Anyway, guys, please comment below. If you like the video, hit the thumbs button, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. And with that, have a good night. Thanks for listening.